back. I'm Tedward, and today, thanks to Bond Group in Waltham, Massachusetts, we're driving this gorgeous blue 2013 Aston Martin DB9. It's powered by a naturally aspirated 5.9-liter V12 mated to a 6-speed automatic gearbox, the Touchtronic 2, powering the rear wheels with 510 horsepower and about 460 pound-feet of torque. These were also available in a 6-speed manual. Most of them are these, and they ran for quite some years because production started in January 2004 and ended in, I believe, July of 2016. That's quite a run. And actually, these went through, I think, 3 facelifts in 2008, 2010, and 2012. So this is the sort of final iteration of the standard cars facelift. So you get the clear tails, and in 08 they upgraded a few things to make them A, faster, and B, a little smoother with the variable suspension. But the DB9 is probably the greatest affordable entry point into a V12. Now, that's not to say that maintenance is going to be cheap, but at around $40,000 for a nice one, well, that puts you in a position where you can pad some of your purchase with maintenance. So let's take a quick peek under the hood, because this is genuinely why you would buy the car. First, the badge. You're going to want an Aston Martin. But second, what's under the hood? It's nice to have a V12, and to have a V12 in a sports car, because otherwise affordable V12s are going to be in things like big Mercedes or BMWs, and maybe a 760iL or an S600 isn't the thing that you feel so cool in, but this always looks cool. The DB9 is the successor to the DB7. It was my understanding that they didn't go with DB8 because they didn't want anyone to think or mistake that it had a V8 in it, so they went to DB9. Feel free to correct me in the comments if you'd like, but that's what I've heard. Of course, you've got the Aston Martin, hand-built in England, final inspection by Ahmed Munir. But the DB9 is especially important because this was kind of the start of the VH platform taking over the brand. Prior to this, they were running a lot of parts bin stuff. DB7 is very similar to a Jag, and it started as an inline 6, went to a V12. They were using Miata parts, they were using Ford parts, just a lot of sort of shoddiness in a DB7, and to get a good DB7 is a difficult thing. DB9 started to really set these cars apart and make them feel like it's its own holistic engineering brand, and they certainly look the part. I love the ducktail on the back, and with the second or third facelift you get the clear tails, which looks awfully cool. There isn't a ton of boot space in here because it is a 4-seater, despite the fact that these rear seats are not usable for most people, because holy cow, only a small child can get in the back. I've got a friend, Ryan, who actually just bought his first DB9 recently, screaming deal, and he has 2 little kids, so it works out for him because he can put them in the back, but you're not going to fit a full-size adult. If you're buying one, make sure you get the umbrella in the back. I want to say that's a $400 option, and you don't want to miss out. Anyway, up front, I think this is where these cars are just so gorgeous. They've got great gauge clusters. Everything about the dashboard, the buttons, the layout, it feels very driver-oriented, and it's very distinctly Aston Martin. We'll talk about that when we're driving. This one's been, let's say, updated or upgraded a little bit. The roof, if you look closely, that's houndstooth, which looks awfully cool. And then you've got your little paddles here for that. The only things that feel cheap on these cars, I would say, are these little stalks here. That feels very Ford, so that's not that impressive, but everything else in the car feels reasonably well weighted and nice. But anything you were going to complain about, maybe you can complain about at MSRP when you're in the $100,000-$200,000 range, but at about $35,000 to $45,000, I think we'll just accept where we're at. It's got carbon ceramic brakes and 6-pot calipers up front. This one's on some aftermarket wheels. You can let me know whether you like them or hate them in the comments. I actually think the style matches the car pretty well. These are 20-inch wheels. Maybe I'd go with an Aston Martin center cap instead of that. But up front, we've got a 245 section tire. In the rear, a 295 to hold down the fort under throttle. So let's get out there and take it for a drive. To start our bargain V12, we have this center ignition here. Now, when you put the key in, this little guy folds up or folds down, depending if you're taking in or out. This is the valet key. The nice one, the good key, which I'm sure is somewhere, maybe we'll find it later, has like the crystal, and it looked so cool. It was great jewelry. This is the kind of key, not this one, but that was the kind of key that if you were sitting at a hotel bar, you'd want to maybe leave that next to your drink in case you were trying to pick somebody up. Anyway. Hard not to love a V12 startup. And it just sounds the part. It's pretty wild. You're gonna see this blinking TPMS thing because these wheels just don't have the sensors in them. So we've got air, not to worry, but there is going to be a system fault. And in the world of Aston Martin, a system fault for tires, pretty minimal. We're in a good spot. So get it into drive. That's where our transmission controls are, and roll off. Now, if we had the parking brake up, I'll show you this real quick. That is engaged, and that is disengaged. So please don't steal an Aston Martin, but if you need to, that's how you do it. Now, we've got mirror controls over here, so I can adjust like so. You may have thought, hey, but what about this little toggle switch? Oh boy, not a toggle switch. This is your Aston Martin pen in case you bump into somebody and you got to give them a number, or you literally bump into somebody and you got to give them a number. So put that there. We'll get this off the line at the bottom of the hill and avoid the little puddles. Okay. We're in sport mode. Let's roll into it over here. It's a pretty snarling, mad engine, but at the low revs, it has a little bit of that Dodge Caravan vibe. So here, let me I'll show you what I'm talking about. If we're just rolling into it, you know, nicely. Right? It's got a little bit of that old school Dodge Caravan thing. But if you get into it, that is not a sound you're going to get out of the Caravan. But essentially, it's like two Ford Mondeo 6s welded together. That's how I've been taught about what these V12s are. But they're pretty wonderful, and they're just filled with torque. It's nice to have a naturally aspirated engine too, because it's very responsive. And I just like the simplicity of it. You're not dealing with turbos. Get a little air going in here. It is a warm day. That's a big hole, so he's not giving me much room, and I don't really want to play a game of dip the Aston in the dirt. Nice thing about these VH platform cars is just how stable and rigid they are. They feel great. They're not small cars. You put this next to a 996 or a 997 Porsche, it would look pretty darn big. They're long, but they still manage to have enough ground clearance to get over some ugly bumps, which is very helpful. Just have kind of a big nose, so you've got to be a little cautious pulling out of places like this, but you figure it out. Pretty aggressive LSD in the back, giving us a little hint of wheel spin on that inside. But these cars are just so stable. They feel fantastic. We'll make sure that we give this. He needs to downshift. That is improper riding technique. Yikes. You're gonna fall over. Anyway, we'll critique that later. the car does feel expensive. I'll put it that way. Like, it has lovely stability. It's rigid. The steering has wonderful damping, despite the fact that it's fairly light, but it's communicative. So I get a lot of information through my fingertips from a tactility standpoint, which is great. I don't have to wonder what's going on with the road. And that's where, an Aston Martin needs to be different than some of the other high-end luxury cars in the field, because there are sporty Bentleys for sure, but those sporty Bentleys are not designed to be necessarily sports cars. They're more sporty luxury cars, where this is a sports car first and a luxury car second. And the distinction is immense. I mean, they just do not feel the same whatsoever. The original DB9s were a bit harsher in the suspension department. So this, being kind of the second or third iteration of facelifts, they softened up the normal mode quite a bit. I almost never run the suspension in sport mode just because it's too stiff. It's a little overkill. You know what? We're gonna go this way because I don't want to be stuck behind a Honda Fit. Interesting. I suppose they could have told me that they were closing this road like at the beginning of the road instead of up here, but we shall turn around and overcome this mistake of the town. We've got a reverse camera, which is actually really lovely because it's kind of difficult to see out over that rear, just visually over the shoulder. I suppose the fit is gone. So these paddles are a little bit necessary because I just let it do its drive thing and I was giving it a reasonable bootful of throttle. The 6-speed, even though it's in sport mode, still wanted to upshift. It upshifted on me a little bit earlier than I would have preferred. How'd you get hit by a car? Well, I was walking and on a narrow road with no shoulder and staring at my phone. The thing I like about these cars is that they still have such a presence. You can park this anywhere and someone's going to take a peek and say, ooh, that's gorgeous. It is a pretty car. So the only thing that's difficult is the tach doesn't have a red line indicated on it, so sometimes it is a little tricky to get the shifts right if you're doing it manually. We'll see what it does in auto. Don't know what's floating around back there, but there's something. Anyway, The nice thing about these cars is that they do just handle well. Like, it's not necessarily going to be your Miata in the canyons, but wow, what a line. What an interesting line to choose in your Subaru. Was that the cell phone line where you're just staring at a text message and then deciding that maybe driving the car is somewhat important as you're entering a highway? Interesting. I wish we could like chat with these people and be like, tell me about your inputs. The nice thing about these though is that they do handle well, and it is a rewarding drive whether or not you have the manual or the automatic. And that's something that I think is really joyous about these cars, is that you can have the classy valet experience to the country club or, you know, going out to eat, whatever you're doing. You can also take it on some windy mountain roads and just thrash it and enjoy it. And like, I guess they're just doing construction on everything and tearing up the roads. So are you just running the red? Just gonna run it? Cool. Is that Tesla autopilot technology saying it's totally cool to run a red light? Interesting, interesting, interesting. Huh, would you look at that? The light turned. Now we can go through legally. We've got a clockwise speedometer and an anti-clockwise tach, so that way the needles sweep up to the moon and touch basically when you're at top speed, which is so cool. And I miss the jewelry of cars. I'm not trying to say, oh man, things were so much better back then, but like, screens are cost-cutting measures, okay? And I think in lower-end commuter cars, they make perfect sense. It's fine to have a screen in most normal cars, but when we're talking about high-end stuff like an Aston Martin, a Bentley, a Rolls-Royce, a screen just seems totally antithetical to the point, because especially those buyers are people who love motion. They love mechanical things. They're wearing $50,000, $60,000 watches because of their movements. Well, in what world are you handing them an Apple Watch and saying, duh, this is better for you, also still pay me $50,000, $60,000? Like, the cars aren't cheaper despite the screens, so why not give us the beautiful fonts, the beautiful jewelry of the needles and the backgrounds and the concavity of these bezels and all this great stuff in these cars? I do think there's going to be a return to form in that way, because I don't think people are going to really get behind this in the way that a lot of these auto manufacturers think that people will. Again, totally fine in your Honda, your Kia, your Nissan, whatever. That sometimes does the job just fine, and it can give a driver a sense of elevated experience if they're not in stuff like this, but I frankly don't understand it. Being stuck in traffic isn't such a bad thing in these cars either, and I think that's what makes them appealing to me now, because it could be used as a reasonable daily driver. I don't always love to have a sports car when I'm trying to use it for normal things, because being stuck in traffic in a cool sports car is upsetting and demoralizing and uncomfortable. And this is not. You can just cruise around. It's perfectly happy being a lazy V12 that lurks in the background, sort of in that Bentley Rolls-Royce sense. But when you push it, it's ready to deliver all the torque and shout at you from the back. But this is what it's born to do. Maybe not at 70 miles an hour, maybe more like 140 to 160, but it's designed to cross a continent. It's designed to be in Europe and go country to country, get you on your way in style, in comfort, and in speed. I get hunted down by an Altima, I'm reminded nothing is faster than a rental car. So I think that's going to do it. The DB9 is a great entry point for a lot of people on a budget for a V12. You've got to have a reasonable appetite for either DIY projects or large service bills, because maintenance on these cars is not always the cheapest. Even just replacing coils and a few other things can add up to thousands and thousands of dollars. And maybe your $35,000 to $45,000 entry price was appealing, but then maybe the maintenance was not. So just be sure that if you're buying one, if you can afford two of them, you're golden. I think you're in a good spot. But just make sure that you're not spending the whole kit and caboodle on that somewhat low entry price relative to other V12s, because otherwise you may be putting yourself in a pretty risky spot with your once very expensive Aston Martin. So thank you so much to Bond Group for tossing the key to this gorgeous blue on tan Aston Martin DB9 and reminding me what it is to drive in early 2010s style, luxury, and class. Don't forget to respect the drive, and I'll see you in the next one.